Hello, and welcome back to Baby Elias's stories. We now return to Sindbad the Sailor by Arabian Nights. The fifth voyage of Sinbad the Sailor. All the troubles and calamities I had undergone could not cure me of my inclination to make new voyages. I therefore bought goods, departed with them for the best seaport, and there I might not be obliged to depend upon a captain, but have a ship at my own command. I remained till one was built on purpose at my own charge. When the ship was ready, I went on board with my goods, but not having enough to load her, I agreed to take with me several merchants of different nations with their merchandise. We sailed with the first fair wind, and after a long navigation, the first place we touched at was a desert island, where we found the egg of a roc, equal in size to that I formerly mentioned. There was a young roc in it, just ready to be hatched, and its beak had begun to break the egg. The merchants who landed with me broke the egg with hatchets, and making a hole in it, poured out the young roc piecemeal and roasted it. I had in vain entreated them not to meddle with the egg. Scarcely had they finished their repast, when there appeared in the air, at a considerable distance, two great clouds. The captain of my ship, knowing by experience what they meant, said they were the male and female parents of the roc, and pressed us to re-embark with all speed to prevent the misfortune which he saw would otherwise befall us. The two rocs approached with a frightful noise, which they redoubled when they saw the egg broken, and their young one gone. They flew back in the direction they had come and disappeared for some time, while we made all the sail we could in the endeavor to prevent that which unhappily befell us. They soon returned, and we observed that each of them carried between its talons an enormous roc. When they came directly over my ship, they hovered, and one of them let go his roc, but by the dexterity of the steersman, it missed us and fell into the sea. The other so exactly hit the middle of the ship as to split it into pieces. The mariners and passengers were all crushed to death or fell into the sea. I myself was of the number of the latter, but as I came up again, I fortunately caught hold of a piece of the wreck, and swimming, sometimes with one hand and sometimes with the other, but always holding fast the plank, the wind and the tide favoring me, I came to an island and got safely ashore. I sat down upon the grass to recover myself from my fatigue, after which I went to the island to explore it. It seemed to be a delicious garden. I found trees everywhere, some of them bearing green and others ripe fruits, streams of fresh pure water. I ate of the fruits, which I found excellent, and drank of the water, which was very light and good. When I was a little advanced into the island, I saw an old man who appeared very weak and infirm. He was sitting on the bank of a stream, and at first I took him to be one who had been shipwrecked like myself. I went toward him and saluted him, but he only slightly bowed his head. I asked him why he sat so still, but instead of answering me, he made a sign for me to take him upon my back and carry him over the brook. I believed him really to stand in need of my assistance, took him upon my back, and having carried him over, bade him get down, and for that end stooped, that he might get off with ease. But instead of doing so, which I laugh at every time I think of it, the old man, who to me appeared quite decrepit, threw his legs nimbly about my neck. He sat astride upon my shoulders, and held my throat so tight that I thought he would have strangled me, and I fainted away. Notwithstanding my fainting, the ill-natured old fellow still kept his seat upon my neck. When I had recovered my breath, he thrust one of his feet against my side, and struck me so rudely with the other that he forced me to rise up against my will. Having arisen, he made me carry him under the trees, and forced me now and then to stop, that he might gather and eat fruit. He never left his seat all day, and when I lay down to rest at night, he laid himself down with me, still holding fast about my neck. Every morning he pinched me to wake me. He pinched me to make me awake, and afterward obliged me to get up and walk, and spurred me with his feet. One day I found several dry calabashes that had fallen from a tree. I took a large one, and after cleaning it, pressed it into some juice of grapes, which abounded in the island. Having filled the calabash, I put it by in a convenient place, and going thither again some days after, I tasted it, and found the wine so good that it gave me new vigor, and so exhilarated my spirits that I began to sing and dance as I carried my burden. The old man, perceiving the effect which this had upon me, and that I carried him with more ease than before, made me a sign to give him some of it. I handed him the calabash, and the liquid pleasing his palate, he drank it off. There being a considerable quantity of it, he soon began to sing, and to move about from side to side in his seat upon my shoulders, and by degrees to loosen his legs from about me. Finding that he did not press me as before, I threw him upon the ground, where he lay without motion. I then took up a great stone and slew him. I was extremely glad to be thus freed forever from this troublesome fellow. I now walked toward the beach, where I met the crew of a ship that had cast anchor to take in water. They were surprised to see me, but more so at hearing the particulars of my adventures. "You fell," said they, "into the hands of the old man of the sea, and are the first who ever escaped strangling by his malicious embraces. He never quitted those he had once made himself master of, till he had destroyed them, and he has made this island notorious by the number of men he has slain." They carried me with them to the captain, who received me with great kindness. He put out again to sea, and after some days' sail we arrived at the harbor of a great city, the houses of which overhung the sea. One of the merchants, who had taken me into his friendship, invited me to go along with him. He gave me a large sack, and having recommended me to some people of the town who used to gather coconuts, desired them to take me with them. "Go," said he, "follow them, and act as you see them do, but do not separate from them, otherwise you may endanger your life." Having thus spoken, he gave me provisions for the journey, and I went with them. We came to a thick forest of cocoa palms, very lofty, with trunks so smooth that it was not possible to climb to the branches that bore the fruit. When we entered the forest, we saw a great number of apes of several sizes, who fled as soon as they perceived us, and climbed to the tops of the trees with amazing swiftness. The merchants with whom I was gathered stones, and threw them. The merchants with whom I was gathered stones, and threw them at the apes on the trees. I did the same, and the apes, out of revenge, threw coconuts at us so fast, and with such gestures as sufficiently testified their anger and resentment. We gathered up the coconuts, and from time to time threw stones to provoke the apes, so that by this stratagem we filled our bags with coconuts. I thus gradually collected as many coconuts as produced me a considerable sum. Having laden our vessel with coconuts, we set sail and passed by the islands where pepper grows in great plenty. From thence we went to the Isle of Comari, where the best species of wood of aloes grows. I exchanged my coconuts in those 2 islands for pepper and wood of aloes, and went with other merchants pearl fishing. I hired divers who brought me up some that were very large and pure. I embarked in a vessel that happily arrived at Bussorah. From thence I returned to Baghdad, where I realized vast sums from my pepper, wood of aloes, and pearls. I gave the 10th of my gains in alms, and as I had done upon my return from my other voyages, and rested from my fatigues. Sinbad here ordered 100 sequins to be given to Sinbad, and requested him and the other guests to dine with him the next day to hear the account of his 6th voyage. The 6th voyage of Sinbad the sailor. I know, my friends, that you will wish to hear how, after having been shipwrecked 5 times and escaped so many dangers, I could resolve again to tempt fortune and expose myself to new hardships. I am myself astonished at my conduct when I reflect upon it, and must certainly have been actuated by my destiny, from which none can escape. But that as it may, after a year's rest, I prepared for a 6th voyage. Notwithstanding the entreaties of my kindred and friends, who did all in their power to dissuade me, instead of taking my way by the Persian Gulf, I traveled once more through several provinces of Persia and the Indies, and arrived at a seaport. Here I embarked in a ship, the captain of which was bound on a long voyage, in which he and the pilot lost their course. Suddenly we saw the captain quit his rudder, uttering loud lamentations. He threw off his turban, pulled his beard, and beat his head like a madman. We asked him the reason, and he answered that we were in the most dangerous place in all the ocean. A rapid current carries the ship along with it, and we shall all perish in less than a quarter of an hour. Pray to God to deliver us from this peril. We cannot escape if he do not take pity on us. At these words, he ordered the sails to be lowered, but all the ropes broke, and the ship was carried by the current to the foot of an inaccessible mountain, where she struck and went to pieces. Yet in such a manner that we saved our lives, our provisions, and the best of our goods. The mountain at the foot of which we were was covered with wrecks, and a vast number of human bones, and with an incredible quantity of goods and riches of all kinds. These objects served only to augment our despair. In all other places, it is usual for rivers to run from their channels into the sea. But here, a river of fresh water runs from the sea into a dark cavern whose entrance is very high and spacious. What is most remarkable in this place is that the stones of the mountain are of crystal, rubies, and other precious stones. Here is also a sort of fountain of pitch or bitumen that runs into the sea, which the fish swallow and evacuate soon afterward, turned into ambergris, and this the waves throw up on the beach in great quantities. Trees also grow here, most of which are of wood of aloes, equal in goodness to those of Komari. To finish the description of this place, it is not possible for ships to get off where once they approach within a certain distance. If they be driven thither by a wind from the sea, the wind and the current impel them, and if they come into it when a land wind blows, which might seem to favor their getting out again, the height of the mountain stops the wind and occasions a calm, so that the force of the current carries them ashore, and what completes the misfortune is that there is no possibility of ascending the mountain or of escaping by sea. We continued upon the shore, at the foot of the mountain, in a state of despair, and expected death every day. On our first landing, we had divided our provisions as equally as we could, and thus everyone lived a longer or a shorter time, according to his temperance, and the use he made of his provisions. I survived all my companions, and when I buried the last, I had so little provisions remaining that I thought I could no longer survive, and I dug a grave, resolving to lie down in it because there was no one left to pay me the last offices of respect. But it pleased God once more to take compassion on me, and put it in my mind to go to the bank of the river, which ran into the great cavern. Considering its probable course with great attention, I said to myself, "This river, which runs thus underground, must somewhere have an issue. If I make a raft and leave myself to the current, it will convey me to some inhabited country, or I shall perish. If I be drowned, I lose nothing, but only change one kind of death for another." I immediately went to work upon large pieces of timber and cables, for I had a choice of them from the wrecks, and tied them together so strongly that I soon made a very solid raft. When I had finished, I loaded it with some chests of rubies, emeralds, ambergris, rock crystal, and bales of rich stuffs. Having balanced my cargo exactly and fastened it well to the raft, I went on board with 2 oars that I had made, and leaving it to the course of the river, resigned myself to the will of God. As soon as I entered the cavern, I lost all light, and the stream carried me I knew not whither. Thus I floated on in perfect darkness, and once found the arch so low that it very nearly touched my head, which made me cautious afterward to avoid the like danger. After this while I ate nothing but what was just necessary to support nature. Yet, notwithstanding my frugality, all my provisions were spent. Then I became insensible. I cannot tell how long I continued so, but when I revived, I was surprised to find myself on an extensive plain on the brink of a river, where my raft was tied, amidst a great number of Negroes. I got up as soon as I saw them and saluted them. They spoke to me, but I did not understand their language. I was so transported with joy that I knew not whether I was asleep or awake. But being persuaded that I was not asleep, I recited the following words in Arabic aloud. Call upon the Almighty, He will help thee. Thou needest not perplex thyself about anything else. Shut thy eyes, and while thou art asleep, God will change thy bad fortune into good. One of the Negroes who understood Arabic, hearing me speak thus, came toward me and said, Brother, be not surprised to see us. We are inhabitants of this country, and water our fields from this river, which comes out of the neighboring mountain. We saw your raft, and one of us swam into the river and brought it hither, where we fastened it, as you see, until you should awake. Pray tell us your history. Whence did you come? I begged of them first to give me something to eat, and then I would satisfy their curiosity. They gave me several sorts of food, and when I had satisfied my hunger, I related all that had befallen me, which they listened to with attentive surprise. As soon as I had finished, they told me by the person who spoke Arabic and interpreted to them what I said, that I must go along with them and tell my story to their king myself, it being too extraordinary to be related by any other than the person to whom the events had happened. They immediately sent for a horse, and having helped me to mount, some of them walked before to show the way, while the rest took my raft and cargo and followed. We marched till we came to the capital of Serendib, for it was on that island I had landed. The Negroes presented me to the king. I approached his throne and saluted him, as I used to do the kings of the Indies. That is to say, I prostrated myself at his feet. The prince ordered me to rise, received me with an obliging air, and made me sit down near him. I concealed nothing from the king, but related to him all that I have told you. At last my raft was brought in, and the bales opened in his presence. He admired the quantity of wood of aloes and ambergris, but, above all, the rubies and emeralds, for he had none in his treasury that equaled them. Observing that he looked on my jewels with pleasure and viewed the most remarkable among them one after another, I fell prostrate at his feet and took the liberty to say to him, Sire, not only my person is at your majesty's service, but the cargo of the raft, and I would beg of you to dispose of it as your own. He answered me with a smile, Sinbad, I will take nothing of yours, far from lessening your wealth. I design to augment it, and will not let you quit my dominions without marks of my liberality. He then charged one of his officers to take care of me, and ordered people to serve me at his own expense. The officer was very faithful in the execution of his commission, and caused all the goods to be carried to the lodgings provided for me. I went every day at a set hour to make my court to the king, and spent the rest of my time in viewing the city, and what was most worthy of notice. The capital of Serendib stands at the end of a fine valley, in the middle of the island, encompassed by high mountains. They are seen 3 days' sail off at sea. Rubies and several sorts of minerals abound. All kinds of rare plants and trees grow there, especially cedars and coconuts. There is also a pearly fishery in the mouth of its principal river, and in some of its valleys are found diamonds. I made, by way of devotion, a pilgrimage to the place where Adam was confined after his banishment from paradise, and had the curiosity to go to the top of the mountain. When I returned to the city, I prayed to the king to allow me to return to my own country, and he granted me permission in the most obliging and honorable manner. He would force a rich present upon me, and at the same time he charged me with a letter from the commander of the faithful, our sovereign, saying to me, I pray you give this present from me and this letter to the Caliph Harun al-Rashid, and assure him of my friendship. The letter from the king of Serendib was written on the skin of a certain animal of great value, very scarce, and of a yellowish color. The characters of this letter were of azure, and the contents as follows. King of the Indies, before whom march 100 elephants, who lives in a palace that shines with 100,000 rubies, and who has in his treasury 20,000 crowns enriched with diamonds, to Caliph Harun al-Rashid. Though the present we send you be inconsiderable, receive it, however, as a brother and a friend, in consideration of the hearty friendship which we bear for you, and of which we are willing to give you proof. We desire the same part in your friendship, considering that we believe it to be our merit, as we are both kings. We send you this letter as from one brother to another. Farewell. The present consisted of one single ruby made into a cup about half a foot high, an inch thick, and filled with round pearls of half a dram each. The skin of a serpent, whose scales were as bright as an ordinary piece of gold, and had the virtue to preserve from sickness those who lay upon it. 50,000 drams of the best wood of aloes, with 30 grains of camphor as big as pistachios, and finally a female slave of great beauty, whose robe was covered with jewels. The ship set sail, and after a very successful navigation we landed at Bussorah, and from thence I went to the city of Baghdad, where the first thing I did was to acquit myself of my commission. I took the king of Serendib's letter and went to present myself at the gate of the commander of the faithful, and was immediately conducted to the throne of the caliph. I made my obeisance and presented the letter in gift. When he had read what the king of Serendib wrote to him, he asked me if that prince were really so rich and potent as he represented himself in this letter. I prostrated myself a second time, and rising again said, Commander of the faithful, I can assure your majesty he doth not exceed the truth. I bear him witness. Nothing is more worthy of admiration than the magnificence of his palace. When the prince appears in public, he has a throne fixed on the back of an elephant, and rides betwixt two ranks of his ministers, favorites, and other people of his court. Before him, upon the same elephant, an officer carries a golden lance in his hand, and behind him there is another, who stands with a rod of gold, on the top of which is an emerald, half a foot long and an inch thick. He is attended by a guard of 1,000 men, clad in cloth of gold and silk, and mounted on elephants richly caparisoned. The officer who is before him on the same elephant cries from time to time with a loud voice, Behold the great monarch, the potent and redoubtable Sultan of the Indies, the monarch greater than Solomon and the powerful Maharaja. After he has pronounced those words, the officer behind the throne cries in his turn, This monarch so great and so powerful must die, must die, must die. And the officer before replies, Praise alone be to him who liveth forever and ever. The Caliph was much pleased with my account and sent me home with a rich present. Here Sinbad commanded another 100 sequins to be paid to Sinbad, and begged his return on the morrow to hear his 7th and last voyage. The 7th and last voyage of Sinbad the sailor. On my return home from my 6th voyage, I had entirely given up all thoughts of again going to sea, for besides that my new age now required rest, I was resolved no more to expose myself to such risks as I had encountered, so that I thought of nothing but to pass the rest of my days in tranquility. One day, however, an officer of the Caliph's inquired for me. "The Caliph," said he, "has sent me to tell you that he must speak with you." I followed the officer to the palace, where, being presented to the Caliph, I saluted him by prostrating myself at his feet. "Sinbad," he said to me, "I stand in need of your service. You must carry my answer and present to the King of Serendib." This command of the Caliph was to me like a clap of thunder. "Commander of the faithful," I replied, "I am ready to do whatever your majesty shall think fit to command, but I beseech you most humbly to consider what I have undergone. I have also made a vow never to leave Baghdad." Perceiving that the Caliph insisted upon my compliance, I submitted and told him that I was willing to obey. He was very well pleased and ordered me 1,000 sequins for the expenses of my journey. I prepared for my departure in a few days. As soon as the Caliph's letter and present were delivered to me, I went to Bussorah, where I embarked and had a very prosperous voyage. Having arrived at the Isle of Serendib, I was conducted to the palace with much pomp, when I prostrated myself on the ground before the king. "Sinbad," said the king, "you are welcome. I have many times thought of you. I bless the day on which I see you once more." I made my compliments to him and thanked him for his kindness, and delivered the gifts from my august master. The Caliph's letter was as follows. "Greeting in the name of the sovereign guide of the right way, from the servant of God, Harun al-Rashid, whom God hath set in the place of vice-regent to his prophet, after his ancestors of happy memory, to the potent and esteemed Raja of Serendib. We received your letter with joy, and send you this from our imperial residence, the Garden of Superior Wits. We hope when you look upon it, you will perceive our good intention and be pleased with it. Farewell." The Caliph's present was a complete suit of cloth of gold, valued at 1,000 sequins, 50 robes of rich stuff, 100 of white cloth, the finest of Cairo, Suez, and Alexandria, a vessel of agate, more broad than deep, an inch thick, and half a foot wide, the bottom of which represented in bas relief a man with one knee on the ground, who held a bow and an arrow ready to discharge at a lion. He sent him also a rich tablet, which, according to tradition, belonged to the great Solomon. The king of Serendib was highly gratified at the caliph's acknowledgement of his friendship. A little time after this audience I solicited leave to depart, and with much difficulty obtained it. The king, when he dismissed me, made me a very considerable present. I embarked immediately to return to Baghdad, but had not the good fortune to arrive there so speedily as I had hoped. God ordered it otherwise. 3 or 4 days after my departure, we were attacked by pirates, who easily seized upon our ship because it was not a vessel of war. Some of the crew offered resistance, which cost them their lives. But for myself and the rest, who were not so imprudent, the pirates saved us, carried us into a remote island, where they sold us. I fell into the hands of a rich merchant, who, as soon as he bought me, took me to his house, treated me well, and clad me handsomely as a slave. For some days after, he asked me if I understood any trade. I answered that I was no mechanic, but a merchant, and that the pirates who sold me had robbed me of all I possessed. "Tell me," replied he, "can you shoot with a bow?" I answered that the bow was one of my exercises in my youth. He gave me a bow and arrows, and taking me behind him on an elephant, carried me to a thick forest some leagues from the town. We penetrated a great way into the wood, and when he thought fit to stop, he bade me alight. Then, showing me a great tree, "Climb up that," said he, "and shoot at the elephants as you see them pass by, for there is a prodigious number of them in this forest, and if any of them fall, come and give me notice." Having spoken thus, he left me victuals, and returned to the town. I continued upon the tree all night. I saw no elephant during the night, but next morning, at break of day, I perceived a great number. I shot several arrows among them, and at last one of the elephants fell, when the rest retired immediately, and left me at liberty to go and acquaint my patron with my success. When I had informed him, he commended my dexterity and caressed me highly. We went afterward together to the forest, where we dug a hole for the elephant. My patron designed to return when it was rotten, and take his teeth to trade with. I continued this employment for 2 months. One morning, as I looked for the elephants, I perceived with extreme amazement that, instead of passing by me across the forest as usual, they stopped and came to me with a horrible noise, and in such numbers that the plain was covered and shook under them. They surrounded the tree in which I was concealed, with their trunks uplifted, and all fixed their eyes upon me. At this alarming spectacle, I continued immovable, and was so much terrified that my bow and arrows fell out of my hand. My fears were not without cause, for after the elephants had stared upon me some time, one of the largest of them put his trunk round the foot of the tree, plucked it up, and threw it on the ground. I fell with the tree, and the elephant, taking me up with his trunk, laid me on his back, where I sat more like one dead than alive, with my quiver on my shoulder. He put himself at the head of the rest, who followed him in line one after the other, carried me a considerable way, then laid me down on the ground and retired with all his companions. After having lain some time and seeing the elephants gone, I got up and found I was upon a long and broad hill, almost covered with the bones and teeth of elephants. I doubted not but that this was the burial place of the elephants, and that they carried me thither on purpose to tell me that I should forbear to kill them, as now I knew where to get their teeth without inflicting injury on them. did not stay on the hill, but turned toward the city, and after having travelled a day and a night, I came to my patron. As soon as my patron saw me, "Ah, poor Sindbad!" exclaimed he. "I was in great trouble to know what was become of you. I have been to the forest where I found a tree newly pulled up and your bow and arrows on the ground. I despaired of ever seeing you more. Pray tell me, what befell you?" I satisfied his curiosity, and we both of us set out next morning to the hill. We loaded the elephant which had carried us with as many teeth as he could bear, and when we returned, my master thus addressed me: "Hear now what I shall tell you. The elephants of our forest have every year killed us a great many slaves, whom we sent to seek ivory. For all the caution we could give them, these crafty animals destroyed them one time or another. God has delivered you from their fury and has bestowed that favor upon you only. It is a sign that he loves you and has some use for your service in the world. You have procured me incredible wealth, and now our whole city enriched by your means without any more exposing the lives of our slaves. After such a discovery, I can treat you no more as a slave, but as a brother. God bless you with all happiness and prosperity. I henceforth give you your liberty. I will also give you riches." To this I replied, "Master, God preserve you. I desire no other reward for the service I had the good fortune to do to you and your city, but leave to return to my own country." "Very well," said he. "The monsoon will in a little time bring ships for ivory. I will then send you home." I stayed with him while waiting for the monsoon, and during that time we made so many journeys to the hill that we filled all our warehouses with ivory. The other merchants who traded in it did the same, for my master made them partakers of his good fortune. The ships arrived at last, and my master himself having made choice of the ship wherein I was to embark, loaded half of it with ivory on my account, laid in provisions in abundance for my passage, and besides obliged me to accept a present of some curiosities of the country of great value. After I had returned him 1,000 thanks for all his favors, I went aboard. We stopped at some islands to take in fresh provisions. Our vessels being come to a port on the mainland in the Indies, we touched there, and not being willing to venture by sea to Bussorah, I landed my portion of the ivory, resolving to proceed on my journey by land. I realized vast sums by my ivory, bought several rarities which I intended for presents, and when my equipage was ready, set out in company with a large caravan of merchants. I was a long time on the journey and suffered much, but was happy in thinking that I had nothing to fear from the seas, from pirates, from serpents, or from the other perils to which I had been exposed. I at last arrived safe at Baghdad, and immediately waited upon the Caliph to give him an account of my embassy. He loaded me with honors and rich presents, and I have ever since devoted myself to my family, kindred, and friends. Sinbad here finished the relation of his 7th and last voyage, and then addressing himself to Sinbad, "Well, friend," said he, "did you ever hear of any person that suffered so much as I have done? Is it not reasonable that, after all this, I should enjoy a quiet and pleasant life?" As he said these words, Sinbad kissed his hand and said, "Sir, my afflictions are not to be compared with yours. You not only deserve a quiet life, but are worthy of all the riches you possess, since you make so good a use of them. May you live happily for a long time." Sinbad ordered him to be paid another 100 sequins, and told him to give up carrying burdens as a potter, and to give up carrying burdens as a porter, and to eat henceforth at his table, for he wished that he should live, for he wished that he should all his life have reason to remember that he henceforth had a friend in Sinbad the sailor. The end. Good night, baby Elias.